Howdy, week 3, video 2. Video 1 was about critical infrastructure. Video 2 is going to be some other laws. Now, I've mentioned FIPS 199 and FIPS 200. Those laws I think of as two bricks. They're Federal Information Processing Standards. Sorry, they are not laws, they are standards. And on top of that is the Federal Information Security Management Act, FISMA, first passed in 2002, revised in 2003. The reason FISMA is important is your systems under FISMA have to be compliant with the NIST standards because it directs the Department of Commerce in 2002 to come up with cybersecurity standards, which became the NIST SP 800 documents. And it regulates cybersecurity practices for all federal government agencies and contractors. So if you're anywhere in the federal government supply chain, so I sell to somebody who sells to somebody who sells to somebody who sells to the federal government, guess what? I'm in that supply chain. So I always advise every country in the U.S., be sure you're NIST compliant. In the 2013, the big change between 2002 and 2013 was the change to continuous monitoring. Before that time, when you did a risk assessment, you would do it, you would schedule to come back, maybe 6 months later, that's it. Now we're in continuous monitoring. Something may happen that we need to go back and revisit our risk profile. Another regulation you need to know about is the SEC. If you are dealing with a publicly traded company, they are regulated in the United States by the SEC. Now, I don't have a slide on it because I don't want to get you too in depth, but you're also regulated by the non-public companies, all companies actually, by the Federal Trade Commission on cybersecurity, but I'm not as worried about that. This comes into play with something called the Regulation Fair Disclosure, which says public disclosure of any material information that might affect the stock price or an investor's decision. The courts have interpreted this, for instance, Target, you got sued by your shareholders. Why? Because they said if you had notified them that you were not using industry practices or reasonable practices to protect their data, the data breach that hit Target a few years ago would not have happened. And when that happened, their 401ks lost money. And when we talk about this, I'm not talking about, Joe and Janie Smith. I'm talking about your big institutional investors. Because they're the ones that'll bring the lawsuit on behalf of that Joe and Jane Smith, whatever the name is. So you do have to worry about this if you are in a risk or if in a cybersecurity position, that if and when there is something that happens, there is a public disclosure required. Are you going to do it? No. You just need to be aware of it. It'll come out of your auditing staff. And there's always pending regulations. There's always pending laws. Okay. Now, I used to work in oil and gas, and I talked about the NIST Critical Infrastructure Framework, and I don't have the, you can check the PDF here, but I was always taken by the American Petroleum Institute's letter response to NIST because it came up with a lot of good points. Here's the problems with this NIST, what they were saying. We're already regulated. There's a lack of secure by design in our legacy products. We are the American Petroleum Institute. We represent all those people drilling wells. And you know what? Some of that equipment goes back to the 70s and 80s. And if it ain't broke, we can't afford to fix it. They were afraid this would become more of a standards focus on prevention than the detect and contain, which they're worried about. They were worried about legal issues, although this later was addressed in CISA in 2015. They were a very important point. They were concerned that mandatory controls do not and cannot address the latest cyber attack mode. In other words, we wake up tomorrow, there's a new attack, a 0 day, you get information on it, but guess what? We had controls in place. It didn't find that one. It didn't protect against that one. And API also made a desire by industry for voluntary standards. And I have to admit that the oil and gas companies have come to the table and I think are pursuing this through these different professional organizations. So they also said, look, we're regulated by Sarbanes-Oxley, which was response to Enron, WorldCom, Tyco. We've got to worry about the SEC if we're publicly traded. if we're doing chemical facilities, we have this. If we're power plants, we've got this. If we're a pipeline, we have to worry about the TSA. We have to worry about HIPAA, 50 state data breach notifications, non-U.S. privacy law, EU, Canada, Singapore, China, Argentina, and others. We have to worry about industry standards, and we have to then take all these various requirements against all of our products. It is just overwhelming. Now, they're right. It is overwhelming. But no one's come up with a better suggestion. You have to do your risk assessment. And I put a little comment here. These are regulatory agencies. When bad things happen, then your investigations come in. Then your FBI, your Department of Justice, your FTC, all these others come in. So just the regulatory agencies. Now, Sarbanes-Oxley was passed to Enron. Again, and a current news event is the Enron, the longest-serving Enron employee, Jeff Skilling, was recently released to a federal halfway house. The CEO died of a heart attack and escaped prison. A couple other the bad guys have already been released or turned evidence for the government and got reduced sentences. But Sarbanes-Oxley is interesting because the CEO and CFO must personally certify under criminal law liability that there's accurate and complete financial controls. And many good lawyers say, wait a minute, how can you have accurate and complete financial controls unless you also have accurate and complete cybersecurity controls? Do you see the link? And so they have these various sections, and what's happening is as the court cases proceed and as the regulation and compliance environment either grows or, doesn't grow or retracts or, we have to keep up on the nightly news, they really believe that a lot of cybersecurity professionals say there will be a tipping point when they will bring in SOX and they will hold the CEOs personally liable. Now, here's a little prelude to next week when we talk about FedRAMP. FedRAMP is for the cloud. If you do anything for the federal government of the United States, it goes in the cloud, and that requires a third-party review by law. FedRAMP, you got to do a third-party review. Oh, you've got your own servers farm? And you're not outsourcing that? No third-party review. They even have a name for it, which sounds like a Star Wars robot that didn't make it, the 3PAO. And then there's your NIST risk assessment. I am asking you to take some time before FedRAMP, maybe at the end of this video, go look at aws.amazon.com, find their FedRAMP compliance. Go see what you can find on FedRAMP. Hint, hint, there's going to be some pleasant surprises in there. Now, which standards? Well, I'm going with NIST. But I realize that there are other standards such as International Standards Organization, and then API is a industry standard, but an industry standard focused on petroleum. So I use that as an example. There would be others on automotive, on other things. There is collaboration on the standards organization. If you go through the critical infrastructure documentation, you'll see this. But the U.S. standards will be NIST because based on FISMA. And I believe, and God knows I've been wrong before, but if legislation continues to evolve, NIST will be given greater statutory power. Right now, they are not a regulatory agency. They guide. However, we can see this in the fact that courts are saying these are the standards for cybersecurity. But I believe somewhere along the line, they will get more statutory that you have to comply. So there's all kinds of standards. And 3 aspects of security you got to worry about: electronic, virus protection, firewalls. That's the easy one. Physical security, administrative. The standards tend to be very process-oriented. You have policies which are overarching, like have a secure environment, right? But you have procedures that say do this, do this, do this, and company A may do this one way, and company B this the other way, but they get to the same point. But in standards, you adhere to the standard. There's no wiggle room. They are process-oriented, and NIST has, I have 150, I think it's closer to 200 now, an annual budget of over $1 billion, and they retain this review, read cycle. And I'm going to end with that. It's this very short little nothing kind of slide that ISO, the difference between ISO and NIST. Yes, 27,001 and 2, I have copies of them. I bought them. I bought them because I thought I was paying in French francs. It turns out I was paying in Swiss francs, so I ended up paying several $100s for something I thought I was going to get less than $100. It's voluntary. It tends to be more aspirational. NIST tends to be, first of all, total life cycle security. It's free. It's downloadable, paid for by the U.S. government taxpayers, and you should now already be familiar with that. That's going to end it for this section on compliance, critical infrastructure, and laws. And I may post another video, kind of a fun video, to give you a chance to see how red teams work. Thank you.